Hi, my name is Ricky Adamson, and welcome to Vista Higher Learning's podcast series, The Language Imperative. Vista's commitment for the past 25 years has been providing language solutions. We're proud to sponsor and share the work of those organizations, institutions, and individuals that serve and strengthen language education for all. As the preeminent language and literacy publisher in the United States, Vista's singular focus is empowering you as a language educator with the tools and research-based knowledge that you need to meet the needs of all learners. Whether you're guiding students in learning a new language, improving an additional language, or perfecting their native language, Vista is for you. Thank you for letting us share this podcast with you. Today on The Language Imperative, we're pleased to have Linda Egnatz with us, Executive Director of the Global Seal of Biliteracy. Linda's mission is to provide bilinguals around the world with resources to level up and leverage their bilingualism and link to future opportunities to use and grow their skills through language certification. Linda, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited for you to be here. Could you tell us a little bit about your background?
So, my background is as a Spanish teacher. I had began teaching many, many years ago, and have had the opportunity to teach middle school, high school, college, and university, as well as teaching language methodology courses. So I've seen language learning at all levels.
And that's a really rich experience to have, too, all of those different levels. You see the span of it. So now that you're not teaching, could you tell us a little bit about what your role is now?
So, my role currently now is as the executive director of the Global Seal of Biliteracy. And that role came to me really as a response to what I saw happening in the classroom, where I would see, students that were taking the course, especially in my particular state of Illinois, language was not a requirement for graduation. And so students would take a language course to fulfill a perceived 2-year requirement to go into a 4-year college program. They the goal of the course was checking off a box on a transcript as opposed to acquiring a language. And so for me, I was looking for some kind of solution to that, to student engagement, so that students would do not just the minimums to pass a course and to earn a credit, but actually to acquire the language so that they would be able to use that for the rest of their lives.
So it seems like it's elevated the field of world language from what many people perceived world language to be. Is that how you see it as well?
Absolutely, because with the Seal of Biliteracy movement, what we see is the goal is language acquisition. So it's created a number of different changes. First of all, students are more cognizant of their own pathways and their own proficiency levels, their own gaps, their strengths, as well as their weaknesses. And that's really important. When you want to change learning, you need to provide the learner with agency, and that building that autonomy through a pathway where they can see where what they've achieved, but also that there's more to gain is important. From the curriculum standpoint, there's been a real washback on instruction. In other words, as I maybe test my students and realize that in our particular district, we realized that many of our students were scoring low in the listening area. So that was feedback in terms of a formative feedback that we needed to provide more listening activities to our students, more diverse voices, instead of just listening to the teacher speak in the target language that they heard other languages or other speakers of those languages as well. So that was a piece, but also just in terms of teachers, curriculum design. My activity, is this activity appropriate to the level of the students that I have in front of me? And the most exciting piece is that we found that it oftentimes, it increases the learning sequence. So students are not taking that 2 years only because that's what they perceived as the goal, but now they say, "Oh, I'm going to need to take 3 or 4 years to be able to achieve a seal of biliteracy." And so it's really expanded learning sequences, and the data suggests generally within a couple of years of adoption of a really robust seal of biliteracy program that those language enrollments almost double. So it's changing language acquisition. It's also, hopefully changing those pathways at the higher ed level that these students will achieve, and they'll continue in their language, and that language then becomes a component or a complement to some other field that they study. So yes, it's incredible. It's been a game changer.
It seems like it for teachers and students, which is great. Can you tell a little bit about the difference between the state seals and the global seal?
Sure. And it's probably one of the most common questions that we get. So, as of January of this year, 2024, there are now 50 states that have some kind of recognition program for high school seniors that have bilingual skills. And some of those states, most of them, call it a seal of biliteracy. But we actually have some states that use the term endorsement, or they have a certificate of, for example, Indiana, it's a certificate of multilingual competency, or the comp. And so each state has its own program. So there isn't a seal of biliteracy. There are 50 state seals of biliteracy in that sense. Each state sets its own requirements. It has its own English component, what is required on the English side of the certificate. Although in Hawaii, a bilingual state, a student could earn a seal of biliteracy in Hawaii, in Hawaiian and German, for example. So that's a unique piece. New Mexico, it's the seal of bilingualism and biliteracy, and recognizes that not all of their indigenous languages have a reading and writing component. So each state seal is unique. Its level of proficiency is also unique. There are some states where a state seal could be earned through a portfolio rather than a test, or could be earned through seat time. And so that creates really 50 unique programs. But most of those programs were designed to be awarded to high school seniors upon graduation. And so that left an awful lot of gaps, where people who maybe have language skills at an earlier level prior to their senior year, students that are in heritage language programs that meet and convene on the weekends, university students who could really benefit by documenting their language for a pay differential, or international teachers who'd like to teach in the United States and need to document their English in a way that provides some confidence to their new school that they can communicate with parents and colleagues. So there are a number of different ways where language documentation really, had some gaps, but more, I would say, really opportunities. And so the Global Seal was born as a way to sort of meet those gaps. Many states require, or the state rule or guideline is that only those that are in public schools can participate. So private schools were left out. Again, universities. So what we really truly wanted to do is to provide a way for everyone who has a language skill to document that skill for future purposes. And so I think if we really want language to be valued as a course in a program, or being bilingual as an asset rather than a deficit, we need to be able to document it in ways that can be respected by the next steps, whether that's for college or university placement, or for a career use. And so that's truly what the Global Seal was about, was expanding the opportunities behind what was an incredibly brilliant idea of the state seals. And so the state seals I mentioned are now in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. The Global Seal, which is unique and independent, and rather than similar to the state seals, we have a consistent set of requirements that the candidates must meet, but those requirements are consistent around the world. We've been in all 50 states since 2022 and are now in 41 different countries. So the goal is to provide something consistent, so that when a student or an employee comes with a Global Seal, that that level of that institution of learning or that employer knows exactly what it means, and knows that they can depend upon that person having the skill set that the document says. So really, it's about how do we help students leverage their language skills for those future opportunities? And the way to do that is through documentation.
Interesting. Well, how do the two seals complement each other? So I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking, okay, We have the state seal, but how does this play in with the global seal?
Well, first of all, the state seal is incredibly important. If your school is able to participate in a state seal program, I really hope they do, because it's the first time that government says that having a language is an asset and not a deficit. That being bilingual is important enough to recognize at a state governmental level, and so we want to encourage that recognition of the multilingual capacities of our students, but the respect for the identities that those languages represent, but also as a documented linguistic data bank that each state can then represent, and that's important to employers and important to our local communities. And so the state seal is incredibly important, and I would encourage everyone who can participate to participate. But the state seal also provides some challenges and some gaps. And so one of those, for example, might be in my state of Illinois, where our state level is intermediate high. And many of our heritage learners, many of our Spanish students, they achieve that level. But if I begin, for example, a course in Chinese or Arabic as a freshman in high school, that might be a much more difficult to achieve in 4 years than it is for the Spanish student. And so the Global Seal in that case might offer a unique opportunity, because unlike the State Seal, which is at a single level, the Global Seal has a pathway of certification to extend language learning sequences. So we have 3 levels of certification: at intermediate mid, at advanced low, and at advanced high. We'd like to see a student earn their first Global Seal of Biliteracy perhaps at the end of a dual language immersion program, or as a heritage speaker perhaps in middle school, then level up to their state seal at maybe intermediate mid or intermediate high, and then to continue on to maybe get a 5 on that advanced placement test and earn a working fluency level of Global Seal, and then to continue that language learning toward professional at the university level or in the workplace. And so that's one space. At the same time, we have states, for example, where the level is intermediate low for the state seal or intermediate mid. And we have students who are achieving higher levels of language. And so we want them to be recognized at the highest level that they could achieve, as opposed to where the state level is. And so that's another space where that might be important. Many of our schools use both programs. We have states, for example, there are states like my state of Illinois, the state of Maine, Minnesota, Rhode Island, Hawaii, where state seals offer the potential of receiving university credit in one of their state university systems. We don't want to turn that opportunity down. Certainly, we want to provide students with as many ways to leverage their language skills as possible. On the Global Seal side, we also are working with university pathways. And so for that role, it can cross state lines, because the requirements in Illinois for a Global Seal are the same as they are in Poland or in India or New Mexico. So it doesn't matter what state, the criteria is consistent, which makes it a little bit easier for the university systems to award college credit or advanced placement. And again, the goal for a SEAL is to allow that student to leverage their opportunities. And so there's lots of different ways they can complement, whether it's an ongoing pathway of language learning, or it's providing a student with one more way to recognize their skills. There's no student that turned down a second award or a second opportunity to be recognized. And so, for example, on the Common app, a student could list a state seal as a state award and the Global Seal as an international award. So what we really want to do is just provide as many opportunities as possible for students to recognize the level of language that they've achieved.
Interesting. And you said something that really struck me, which was that it allows for students, well, everyone, to respect their identity. And it seems as if with the state seals, that's what they're doing. They're tailoring it to their population, so to speak, and celebrating their identity. That's what I get out of it.
I would say that's the goal, certainly. But we do have some schools that don't want, either they're not sure or aware of how to find appropriate tests for languages that aren't taught in their school district, and so they limit the seals of biliteracy to those languages that are taught in their district. There are states where, in the state seal programs, where we see a really high level of participation from our emerging bilinguals or our English language learners. We have states where the majority of the state seals are earned by world language learners, and there hasn't been really good communication and collaboration between those two programs. And so, for example, if we look at the 2020 State Seal of Biliteracy report, the national report, there were only 7 states that awarded state seals in 25 or more languages. And, so that's not enough. We want all
Right.
students to be recognized for languages they have, but finding testing is sometimes difficult. Again, each state has recognized and approved certain tests, so there may not be a test approved for my language. I think for me, and part of the impetus behind the Global Seal for me was when I was sitting at a desk, a back to school night for our eighth graders registering to become freshmen the following year at the high school. And I was sitting next to a counselor, and the students and his parent came to the desk, and the counselor said, "Well, is your student going to college or plan to go to college? If he is, he should take a language." And the mother said, "Well, he already has a language. He speaks Polish." And the counselor, considering, what her opportunities at the time were to award credit on a transcript, said, "Well, that doesn't count." And so the student's like, "Well, I'm not going anymore, because it doesn't matter." And it does matter. It's not only identity, but it's also a valid skill that's marketable and useful for the future. So we want every student to feel that their language and their identity is valued. And we can do that through both the state seals, if we think about how do we provide those accommodations. And certainly with the global seal, we're certifying in over 120 different languages and are continuing, adding languages where we find tests that meet our sort of rigorous requirements. So identity is a huge part of what language represents. And having participated in seal of biliteracy ceremonies where a heritage language is represented, I'm in tears, but so are those parents, because it's such a moment of pride. And oftentimes they don't even realize what their student has acquired. And so it's really a joy to see those languages and that diversity represented, and it's truly important.
That's encouraging. That's really encouraging to hear that. So, for students, if they're doing the SIL, are they maximizing the potential? And if so, what does that mean?
Well, I think first of all, that begins with what kind of information is given to the students and provided to the students. Are they being coached and supported by their school in order to maximize that award? So, for example, if it's just added to the transcript and the student doesn't even know about it, they really don't have an opportunity to leverage or maximize that seal of biliteracy. So I think first of all, it begins with communication. They need to know what it represents and they need it to be celebrated. So I have a phrase I say, celebrate what you want to duplicate. So if, for example, a seal of biliteracy is earned from an advanced placement test that was given in May, the student graduated maybe at the end of May, the beginning of June. The score for the at advanced placement test doesn't come back until July. So the student receives something, but there's no opportunity to leverage that certificate. They've already been accepted or rejected, likely at the university of their choice. It didn't help them highlight their language skills as a candidate for acceptance and for college admission. Potentially, scholarship letters have already been closed, and so in that situation, there is a seal awarded, but there's no leverage available to the student. They can't really maximize that tool yet. So there's different things we can think about. One of the things we know that for all seals of biliteracy programs is that if benchmark testing is provided earlier, that student might qualify earlier. And that's one of the probably complements that the Global Seal can provide, is to provide another test that can be given prior to a senior year, so that a student can actually use their seal of biliteracy. In this case, it might be the Global Seal, on early admissions letters, college applications, scholarship applications. And so they can really sort of highlight themselves as that bilingual candidate. Another thing that students should always know, whether they're taking a state seal or or global seal, is that they should know what tests they took to qualify, so that their higher ed program might be more familiar with the test, even if they're not familiar with the seal of biliteracy. They should know what score they received on that test, and if possible, what actual level of proficiency that score represents. Because hopefully, at the university level, either the language department or the college admissions office will recognize one or more of those three. And so part of that is helping students know what they can do. The Global Seal, we provided a video sort of tutorial on how to add your seal of biliteracy or your language skills to the Common App. There's actually 5 different ways that could be done. And that could be confusing, but it requires not only articulation now with the student and the language department or the language teacher, but also with our students, high school counselors' offices. Um, with the Global Seal, we have universities that are awarding between 14 and 16 hours of college credit. That's amazing. But if the counselor doesn't know about it, the counselor may not be able to support the student in actually getting that credit. And so it's really bringing in a number of different people to say, how do we maximize and leverage this opportunity for our students? For many students, earning that much college credit might encourage them to be the first person in their family to actually go to university, because it's savings of time, but also savings of money. So that articulation tool is really, really important. And again, celebrate what you want to duplicate. If you have the opportunity to have an award ceremony or a celebration of some kind, there are students that are younger siblings that are watching and thinking, well, I'm going to aspire to that. You'll have freshmen coming in and say, oh, if I'm going to do that, I have to take 4 years of language. So they begin to plan that when they do their registration for classes. And so if we want to expand sequences, we have to let people see what's possible if they continue to take language. So if it's quiet and only the seniors know about it, it's in the language class, it's a problem. We want the whole community to be aware. So involve, that's going to involve administrators. With the advanced placement test, if we know a seal of biliteracy encourages students to enroll into those upper levels of language, and you could double an advanced placement program. School report cards, oftentimes, they're dependent upon how many students are registered for an AP class and how many students take an AP test. So if you want your administrator to get on board, tell them, hey, we can get more students signing up for AP courses, and that'll improve our school report card. So advocacy is an important part of this. Parents, we have had parents that have advocated so that the school would adopt a seal of biliteracy program. We've had students do that. But as language teachers, it's also, our goal to see students, again, acquire the language we teach, not just take a course.
Right. And it seems as if we're off to a good start. There's more work to be done, but we're off to a good start. And so that's always encouraging to hear. And I think that's encouraging for both teachers and students, parents, universities. So I'm sure a lot of our listeners who are teachers are wondering, okay, how do I participate in this?
So if you have a state seal program, you could, and you're a public school, potentially in some states, private schools are also included. You can start with Google and Seal of Biliteracy in your state. We also have a tool on the Global Seal of Biliteracy's website for state resources, where we have an interactive map that will give you the highlights of your state seal program, as well as a link to your state seal website. Each state, as I said earlier, is unique. For some states, the school has to apply. They may have to assign an administrator. In some states, the students actually apply on their own directly to the state. So, again, that information, you want to discover what that is. Obviously, if you're a university, that state seal might not apply, but then the global seal is an option. For the Global Seal, it's very similar. Both programs are free. Neither, covers the cost of testing, although certainly there are funding available in some cases for testing. But the programs themselves are free of charge, and so it's once you if you're going to test your students, there's so many benefits to doing that in terms of measuring the successes of your programs. Some of you may already be testing and can submit scores that you have right now. So, for example, if you're using an advanced placement test, if you're using a stamp test for some other purpose, you can submit those scores either to your state seal programs or to the Global Seal. So the processes are fairly simple. Essentially, you're going to have an assessment for the students that have language skills. You're going to submit those scores in some way, shape, or form, depending on which program you participate in. And you're going to receive either from the Global Seal, we actually send a certified certificate. It's serial numbered so that students can use that to add to a LinkedIn profile or share it digitally. It has an embossed seal. So that's all shipped to you completely free. If you're in a state seal program, some states will provide a medal or a certificate. In my state of Illinois, they provide artwork that you can use, on your and create your own certificate. So again, there are many seals of biliteracy, but they are all worth pursuing.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And you mentioned earlier that some schools may not be able to participate in the state seal. Uh, for those schools, can they still do the global seal?
Absolutely. So the Global Seal has no grade level or age level requirements. So we work with a lot of schools that are heritage language programs that meet on the weekends. We work with dual language immersion programs that have students that are earning Global Seals in seventh and eighth grade. We also work with over 100 universities to award Global Seals of Biliteracy to their own students, as well as school districts that are using the Global Seal for either recognition or hiring or screening of teachers. So it doesn't, matter your age. If you have a language skill that we can test and document, the Global Seal could be certified. We have an individual application process. So we see a lot of teachers that aren't, maybe don't want to test through their school, but they might be curious about their own proficiency level. A long time ago, when I became a certified teacher, I didn't even have to take a language test to do that. And sometimes, as a language teacher, we've been teaching for 10, 20 years, and it's been a long time maybe since we've had a proficiency test, or we've even, maybe we did a study abroad at a summer program and we'd like to see if we leveled up our own level of skill. So the testing opportunity is there for everyone, as well as the certification opportunity. And if we want, our students to value language, then we can set the example by testing ourselves. As a teacher, if you test for a Global Seal of Biliteracy, here in my state, you can add it to your teacher certification documentation, because the Global Seal is recognized as a language test for teacher certification. But it's also a really good way to experience what your students are going to experience when they take a test. We've had a lot of teachers say they've had an aha moment by testing their own proficiency, like, oh, I should have done more. And now they're able to share that with their students. So their students give their best for the test. So that's also kind of modeling what you ask your students to do. So I think that's important as well.
You mentioned in your state that you can add the global seal to your teaching certificate. And you said that it can, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it can take the place of the actual certification test in the language.
Yes. So in many cases, we'll see a state that perhaps uses the praxis, which actually has a limited number of language tests available. And so the Global Seal offers an opportunity to expand that to the 120 plus languages that we offer documentation and certification in. And so the state of Illinois is using offers at our two higher levels of certification. The Global Seal of Biliteracy is sort of a proxy for whatever language test might have been used, and that's worked well. For example, for school districts that are hiring international teachers, so they can actually screen them for languages, some before making that hiring decision or working on visa documentation. So it's been useful as a way to add to the diversity of language certification. It's also a way for teachers that are not necessarily world language teachers or bilingual education teachers to actually add language to their credentialing and to their endorsements. So that's another kind of exciting piece that is possible. And I know there's some other states that are looking at that opportunity as well.
It seems as if it opens lots of opportunities for students and teachers. So that's encouraging. That's exciting to hear. Can you talk just a little bit about uh, how it changed your classroom?
Absolutely. Anecdotally, I had a student who had earned a 4 on his advanced placement test, which is a great score. And so he had an after school job, and he told his employer that, yeah, I got a 4 on my AP test. The employer knew he was nervous about it, and how did it go? And then, we talked about it, and that score qualified him for a seal of biliteracy. And his employer said, when he told him, I earned a seal of biliteracy, he said, wow, you must be really good at language, and gave him actually more money. And I think that's really what the seal of biliteracy does. It creates a formality to what might have previously just been a test score or a grade in a classroom. It creates a document that is easily comprehensible. If we talk about comprehensible input, a seal of biliteracy is that for a university, for a scholarship provider, or for an employer, because it sounds like now that's a formalization. And I think for the student perspective, we and thinking about it as teachers or schools that are awarding a seal of biliteracy, we have to stop thinking about it as a trophy. It's not I tell students, don't add it to the awards section, add it to your licenses and certifications. That's actually where the Global Seal goes on a LinkedIn profile, because it's serial numbered under licenses and certifications. Language is a marketable skill. It's something that is, you can actually use. It's not just that clapping moment that's over and we move on, because you had perfect attendance. It was wonderful. It's great. But it's not something that's going to propel you into, a particular job field. And so I think what we want to think about is not that trophy moment where we clap, because that means I finished the race. I won the trophy. We want this to be a document that is certified, something that certifies a skill, but something that can be leveled up. There's a pathway here. We don't want students to graduate with a seal of biliteracy and say, "Oh, I'm bilingual. I don't need to take language anymore." No, you've entered in, you're sort of JV. It's time to continue your language learning and level up to varsity, and then go to college, and then go to pro ball. I mean, we want language to be that lifetime piece, and it's dynamic. It's something we continue to grow and learn from. With use, we get better and improve. And I think if that's part of why that pathway, and perhaps complementing a global seal with a state seal, is something useful, because you can say, oh, you have your state seal now, go to university and you can get your global seal after you practice the language more. So I think that's kind of an important piece.
And you mentioned your one student. I'm out of curiosity, other students you had, how has that global seal helped them now that they're out working in the world?
Well, I think one of the pieces is it certainly makes it easier for them to, as I said, articulate their language skills. I had one of our students with his seal of biliteracy was going into medical school, And so in his case, he was going to become a doctor. He was doing his interviews for med school. He did 6 different interviews. He said in 5 of the 6, they talked about the fact that he had seals of biliteracy because he was a certified speaker of English, of course, but his home language of Urdu and the Spanish he learned in my classroom. And they just kept talking about how that was going to be such an asset to him, and he was accepted in all of those programs. Another student who actually did an op-ed in the New York Times on the value of her seal of biliteracy and the value of learning languages. She's had the opportunity to use her seal of biliteracy and now her global seal at the university level to earn internships, scholarships, and she's been applied and accepted for a number of NGO opportunities. So during COVID, when her university went digital and virtual, she thought, well, I guess I can do it from anywhere. And she actually lived in 3 different countries during that time frame, working with NGOs while doing her schoolwork because she had that seal of biliteracy. So I think it's a way to articulate your skills that easily communicates, and again, it's something that then becomes a value document that everyone can understand.
Would you say for teachers, if there's a teacher out there and this teacher comes to you and says, but I'm going to have to change everything about the way I teach, what would you say to that teacher?
I would say first of all, we want to be proficiency based. So if you're not, yes, you should change everything you do. That sounds a little bit dramatic, but I think ultimately, if we're teaching language and students have acquired language, then they're somewhere on that pathway, and that's exactly remember what language acquisition is. It's certainly a pathway, and so I think the first thing is you might want to find out, get some external verification of where your students might be. Test all your students, test a sampling of students, and find out where are we. It could be that, for example, we have a number of schools in our rural areas that don't have an advanced placement program, but they have students that are achieving that first level of intermediate mid by the end of their second or third year. Maybe they're heritage speakers. And I think sometimes that's you might be able to recognize more, but it starts with knowing what your students are able to do, so that testing piece is a possibility, I think, certainly. But I also believe that students are going to be engaged because they see that certificate as being more valuable than a grade. They see it, in fact, in a research study that I participated in and co-authored with Kristen Davin and Amy Heineke. It was published in the Foreign Language Annals. When we did focus groups of students and asked them what was the value of a seal of biliteracy, they didn't identify advanced placement. They didn't identify scholarships or college credit. The number 2 reasons they thought of the value was for a seal of biliteracy was the career space and employment opportunities. So high school students were jumping the university opportunity and thinking of their real long-term future. And so I think that becomes an incredible intrinsic motivator to not just take a class, but to take more classes and to do really well in the classes that they were taking, because there was something important for the student at the end. And when your students want to learn, it's a lot more fun to teach.
Oh, yes. And I couldn't help but think of when I was still teaching, and I know every teacher has heard this before, when the kid asks, "When am I ever going to use this?" Well, this gives them when they're going to use it, how they're going to use it, and how it's going to help them. That's what keeps coming in my mind as I listen to you.
Well, and that's absolutely true. But I do also think and learned in my own classroom experience that as teachers, sometimes we do have to help students visualize them using that language outside of those classroom walls. I mean, I oftentimes will looking at maybe a new unit or a new vocabulary set and say, well, who would use this and where and why? Or how would you use this in your future? We have to sort of paint the vision. Students live in the present, and sometimes we have to paint the picture of what their future possibilities could be. I know I regularly, at least once a year would seat students together by career interest and help so that that became the overlay of everything that we did is how is what's the practical use, because I asked that about any other class as well, like when will I ever use fill in the blank course, right, or this chapter, and students, they're human, so we need to but sometimes we need to give them that opportunity and help them see themselves using the language in a real way. We can't assume. It's wonderful. And I love the fact that some of my former students are now language teachers, but we can't assume that that's their goal. I think one of the best questions you can ask a student is, what's your favorite class? And it not be yours, because it's going to give you insight into, how you can engage that student.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought of it that way. But you did mention teachers painting the picture for students because students do live in the present. And to me, that picture they're painting is bright and exciting and motivating. So it really does open up so many doors for our students and for our teachers. So, is there anything else you would like to tell us about the Global Seal or the State Seal, or any advice you would like to impart?
Well, I think that obviously the most obvious one is adopt a program or adopt both. One test can get students both certificates or both awards. So that's really important. I would also say, and I'll just sort of shift gears slightly to put on my hat as the 2023-2024 president of the Joint National Committee on Languages. Let your legislators know that the Seal of Biliteracy is important to you. We have right now introduced in Congress, as well on both the House and the Senate side, the BEST Act. So that stands for the Biliteracy Education, Seal, and Teaching Act. Basically, to support Seal of Biliteracy movements through providing federal funding to help cover the cost of testing. So that's one of the big barriers, especially when we think about access and equity. And so that's right now in our legislation. Contact your representative or your senator and say we support the BEST Act, and that's something you can do just immediately that
Mhm.
can support not only your students but your school. The second thing I would suggest is get your own seal of biliteracy. So that will help you understand what that testing feels like to your students. It might give you some aha moments. We've had lots of teachers tell us that, but it also we have school districts that are using that as a recognition tool. That all of our teachers are Global Seal certified as a way to identify not just their world language teaching staff, but maybe their bilingual education staff, their janitorial staff. We have a school district in Delaware that is, certifying members of their school board who are bilingual. And so when we, my sort of vision, my goal is, if an employer says, well, do you have a seal of biliteracy? When across the United States, that becomes a valuable question. We know that our classrooms will be full of language learners because it is, we need to see how do you add that value to it. And I think that's a piece of it is in your particular school district, how do you add value to language? And when district leaders lead by example, that's one way to do it.
Yeah, and you mentioned funding, which made me think that, as we're coming out of the pandemic, as that's over, all the funding that schools received during that time, part of that funding, our listeners may not know, is related to world language education. It can be earmarked for world language education. However, it needs to be earmarked by September 30th. So that's another avenue for these teachers who are wanting to implement this and need the funding. I would say that's somewhere they can look as well.
Yeah, there's a number of different, we do have certainly some federal funds. Obviously, some of those Ezra COVID funds were available. So a lot of school districts used those. Um, if your school district is a J ROTC or ROTC program, there is an incredible $15 million a year program called WILARA, where there's funding available for those programs. And right now, another piece of legislation that is making its way into Congress was introduced on the House side is called the World LEAP legislation. And that is similar to what we used to have called the FLAP grant, or the Foreign Language Assistance Program, which was discontinued in 2011. So, but this would replace that with direct, what we refer to as LEA, or local education authorities, to be able to implement, expand language programs. So there's opportunities in some school districts to use title funding, Title I, Title III, Title IV funding, for language programs. So there is some funding available. Some schools, however, write grants to get money, for assistance to cover the cost of testing for seals of biliteracy. And there are even some incredible generous districts and states that provide funding. So where there's a will, there's sometimes a way. But ultimately, for example, I mentioned in my state of Illinois, there's automatic college credit for our state seal recipients. And so parents in my school district felt like a $25 test was worth 8 hours of college credit. So that's another way to look at it.
Well, Linda, I thank you for taking time with me today to talk about the global and state seals. What I hear is that it really is going to change the landscape for world language education, but for the teachers, for the students, it opens up so many opportunities for them.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a game changer. If you could wish for something that would better engage students, would get them excited about acquiring language, would get them to not only want to, but their parents support them taking another year or two of language. If you could get recognition and college credit or advanced placement, it does all of those things, but more importantly, it gives your student a way to articulate their language skills when they start applying for jobs. So it's a win-win, for the student. And on the school side, you're growing your program, you're growing excitement, and you're growing their levels of proficiency. And actually, those test results provide some great feedback and washback on your instruction and curriculum design. So yes, it's a win. You need to do it.
Yes, it's a win-win. Well, thank you, Linda. I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and I thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your busy schedule to discuss it with us.
Well, thank you, Ricky. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. As an educator, you have the power to reimagine and reshape education. Vista Higher Learning is committed to giving you the best programs, resources, information, and support to ensure that your students succeed in school and in life. We are committed to being your partner in education, and thank you for letting us be there for you and your students. For more information about Vista Solutions for your K-12 classroom, visit vistahigherlearning.com.